On the morning of July 2nd, 1951, a landlady in St. Petersburg, Florida stopped by the apartment of 67-year-old widow Mary Hardy Reeser to deliver a telegram. When she tried the door, though, she found it was warm to the touch, which made her uneasy. She called the police. And what the officers and fire investigators found inside Mary's apartment was so bizarre that it would puzzle experts for decades. Because there in the burnt-out room sat the smoldering remains of Mary Reeser. Her body had been almost entirely reduced to ashes. All that was left of her was her left foot still inside her slipper and her skull, which witnesses described as having shrunken to the size of a teacup. The armchair in which she had been sitting was completely destroyed, but the rest of the room was strangely intact. The walls were covered in a greasy soot, yet the newspapers nearby and the furniture were completely untouched. Her clock had stopped at 4:20 a.m., suggesting the fire happened in the early morning hours. How such a fire could happen and reduce a person to ashes without consuming the entire apartment baffled investigators. To burn a body down to its basic elements, you would need an intense heat, usually around 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit in a crematorium. How something like that could happen in a small apartment without engulfing the entire building was anyone's guess. Accidental fire theory. Investigators and scientists put forward various theories to explain what happened to Mary Reese. One was that she fell asleep smoking a cigarette, which ignited her clothes. However, experts noted that if that was the case, the fire would have spread and consumed the entire apartment, rather than staying so localized. A more accepted theory today is what's known as the wick effect. This theory suggests that Mary's clothing caught fire and her body fat sustained a slow smoldering blaze, kind of like a candle wick inside wax. This could explain why the fire consumed her body but left much of the apartment untouched. But some believe that Mary's death was even more bizarre. They believe that she suffered from spontaneous human combustion, a phenomenon in which a living person bursts into flames without any external source of ignition. There are many anecdotal accounts of spontaneous human combustion, but scientific evidence is lacking, and it remains an unlikely explanation for most cases. In Mary's case, though, it's hard to rule out. After all, her skull and foot were largely intact, which would be inconsistent with a typical burning or cremation. And the intense heat required to burn a body so completely would be hard to explain, even in a crematorium, let alone in a small apartment. Spontaneous human combustion may sound far-fetched, but for decades after Mary's death, it was widely reported in newspapers across the country. In fact, her case was so famous that the FBI got involved, although their investigation ultimately failed to find a definitive answer.